In the last video, we talked about what the document object model is and how JavaScript can interact with it to change the appearance of a web page. In this module, we will be learning about the Cascading Style Sheet, or CSS. JavaScript can make a web page dynamic and interactive, but a well-designed web page would also need some styling. For example, we can use better fonts, use a color scheme, or even set a size for the elements and arrange the content. When the HTML is being converted into a DOM by the browser, it fetches all the related resources in the HTML document, things like images, links, etc. And one of the resources would be the CSS. The styles in the CSS would then be attached to each of the DOM nodes, which would finally be shown in the browser. So the process of the browser would look something like this. It loads the HTML, and while the browser is parsing the HTML, it gets the CSS styles. Just think of parsing as analyzing the script and turning it into another form. Then the browser will use the CSS while it's creating the DOM, and then it would display the results to us on the screen. Not only can CSS make a web page look better, it can also improve the user experience, which is a whole field of study. If that's interesting for you, that's what product designers think about in a tech company. So yes, a big part of CSS is to make things pretty, but it enables and facilitates the experience on the website. Similar to how JomaClass videos have pretty animations, but not only do they look good, they're also designed in a way so that you can understand the concepts more easily through the animations. There are 3 different ways to use CSS: the inline method, the internal method, and the external method. Let's learn about all 3 methods and see when it's suitable to use which. First, in the inline method, the style attribute is defined in the opening tag of an element, and its value specifies the style, separated by semicolons. Then, when the web page is loaded in a browser, the style rules will be applied to that element. This is a simple way to apply a style to a single element. The problem with this method is that every single element in an HTML document has to be individually styled. If your web page has a few hundred elements, it would be ridiculous to manage all the styles with this method, especially when a lot of those elements would use the same style anyway. For example, an article would contain a lot of P elements, and they would usually have the same font, size, and color. If you repeatedly have to write the style attribute for each element, it would make your HTML document super long. The second method will solve this, but before jumping ahead, let's talk about a few advantages of the inline method. This method is useful for previewing style changes for an element. For example, right now, I want to quickly compare and see which color looks better for this particular P element. I can quickly change the attributes inside the tag and do a simple test. So to solve the problem of the inline method, we have the second method, the internal method. Here, we use the style element to specify the style rules. But if we just start writing down the styles here, how would the browser know where to apply what? This is why we need selectors. We wrap the style rules with curly braces and specify which element we want to apply that style to. Then, the rules will be applied to all the elements of the matching group. Right now, the selector is the H2 element, so we are telling the browser to change all the H2 elements in this web page to Dodger Blue. We only have one element with H2, which is JomaClass. If we put P as a selector and change the font to Arial and the size to 10, then it will apply to all the P elements here. H2 and P are called element selectors because they can select a specific type of element to be styled. There are also class selectors and ID selectors, which we will talk about more in detail in the module tutorial. So using the style element, we're able to apply style rules to a large group of HTML elements all at once, which is far more efficient compared to the inline method. However, a website might host about tens or even hundreds of different web pages, which means that we have to add the style element to all of the web pages we host. This can also result in repeated code and can also slow down the loading time for web pages. But more importantly, think about what you need to go through if you decided to change the style of an element that's in all of these web pages. You have to update all of the HTML files, which would be very time consuming. That brings us to the third method of applying CSS by importing an external CSS file. In the last method, we used the style element to specify all the style rules. Well, all those rules can be copied and saved into a CSS file. Then you can import the CSS file to your web page using the link element, replacing the entire style element with a single line of code. The selectors will still work, and all the style rules will be applied to the relevant elements when the web page is loaded. Using this single line of code, you can attach the CSS file to all the other web pages you might have in a website. That way, we can be saved from a lot of repeated code and quickly modify any styles to many elements across a large number of web pages. We can do that without the need of going through each style element individually. So let's say we got all the font sizes, layouts, and margins perfectly adjusted, and we are efficiently managing the styles throughout the many web pages of the website using an external CSS file. But then we try to open the website on our phone and everything breaks. It's all ugly. Even more simply, if we just try to adjust our browser size on our desktop, that breaks too. There are so many different devices, different screen sizes and resolutions. Desktop computers, mobile phones, tablets, smart TVs are just some of the examples. Web pages should be able to be resized or rearranged according to its display size, and designing a web page that can do this is called responsive web design, which can be done in HTML and CSS and maybe some JavaScript. For example, when you're setting a size of an image, instead of giving it a fixed size, you can say 80% of the parent size, so that it will always fill into the screen no matter what the screen or browser size is. We can also say, if this web page is displayed on a smaller screen size, then change the layout like this. And that will change the appearance of the web page so that it's suitable for smaller screens. Lucky for us, there is a popular CSS framework called Bootstrap, which is developed to help front-end web developers build responsive web pages, which means that web pages will adjust themselves to look good on different devices. To use Bootstrap, you only need to import the framework just like you would import a style sheet into your HTML document. And you'll be able to use many HTML and CSS design templates from them. So that was how we can use cascading style sheets. But maybe some of you might be wondering what cascading means and what does it have to do with styling? Well, let me tell you, an HTML document can have multiple style sheets attached to it. For example, there could be the browser's default style sheet and the user's style sheet. All browsers will have a default style sheet. Have you ever seen those ugly old web pages? That would be a good example of a default styling. They would mostly use black Times New Roman text, blue underlined links, and purple visited links. Many browsers nowadays let their users set their personalized style sheets, which will always override the browser's default style sheet. That is what cascading means. The style rules can cascade from one to another, overriding the styles of a lower ranked style sheet. There are certain rules that decide the priorities. For example, if the style of this h1 element is defined in an external CSS file as red and defined in the HTML document as blue, and then again styled as green with the inline method as an attribute of h1, what would the browser show? Out of these three cases, the inline method will have the highest priority, then the internal method, followed by the external method. So the browser will be showing this text in green. This way, we can avoid any conflicts when there is more than one rule applied to a certain element. And cascading is the process of combining the different style sheets and figuring out which style has the higher priority, and that's why we call this cascading style sheets. This is a table that shows the rankings of CSS styling. You can see that the inline method outranks the internal method, and as I mentioned before, the user-defined styles outrank the default browser style. HTML and CSS have been around for a while now, and they have evolved for decades under the management of W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. This is why websites from the 90s look very different from what we see in web apps today. The W3C collaborates with browser providers to add new features to CSS to create new things as we evolve our web apps. That is all for this module, and I'll see you in the next one.